Okay, let's unpack this. We're looking at a situation in the world of cyber and tech errors and omissions insurance, that's E&O, that seems, well, like a bit of a paradox, doesn't it?
It really does.
On the one hand, the market for this crucial type of coverage is being described in our source material as quite favorable for buyers.
Right.
It's competitive, well-capitalized, meaning there's plenty of insurance money available. Sounds like good news if you're trying to protect your business, right?
No, it absolutely sounds like good news on the surface, yeah. But here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, a little counterintuitive.
Okay.
Simultaneously, the frequency of cyber threats and the actual number of cyber claims being filed is increasing.
Increasing, while the market gets better for buyers.
Exactly. So you have the scenario where attacks are happening more often, businesses are facing more incidents, yet the market for the insurance designed to cover these very events is getting more competitive and affordable for buyers. That's the central tension that the source material lays bare, and it's what we need to understand today.
Yeah, it feels like those two things shouldn't naturally coexist. So our mission for this deep dive is to dig into this specific analysis of the market conditions as of April 2025.
Right.
We want to understand how both of these things can be true at once. What's driving these market dynamics? What are the specific evolving risks that are contributing to the rising claims frequency, where companies are succeeding in their defenses, but perhaps more critically, where the persistent gaps still lie? And then, armed with that knowledge, we'll explore some actionable strategies you can use to navigate this landscape.
Think of this source as our guide. It gives us the key data points and expert commentary to dissect this seemingly contradictory environment.
Okay.
And as a preview, one of the core insights right up front is that while the number of claims is going up, improved cyber controls implemented by businesses are significantly impacting the actual payments insurers are making for those claims.
So fewer big payouts.
Exactly. Fewer massive payouts, even if more incidents occur, is a major factor in keeping the market competitive. But, and it's a big but, the source makes it clear that serious and evolving risks are absolutely still out there.
Right. The job of managing cyber risk is far from over. Let's jump into this headline contradiction head first.
Yeah.
We have this competitive, buyer-friendly market, lower prices, better terms, more capacity, which is great if you're trying to acquire or renew cyber and E&O insurance.
Yeah, definitely.
But this is happening against a backdrop of undeniably higher frequency of cyber claims. And adding another layer of complexity for the insurers themselves, there's growing concern about how claims from prior years, what the industry calls loss development, are unfolding.
Yeah, that's a key term.
And potentially costing more over time than initially reserved for.
What's fascinating here is understanding what that favorable market truly represents for a buyer. It means leverage. It means potentially securing lower premiums compared to previous years, negotiating for broader coverage terms and conditions.
Better terms, yeah.
Accessing more capacity, the total amount of insurance limit insurers are willing to offer you, and having more flexible options when structuring your insurance program. You're in a stronger negotiating position.
And the source explicitly highlights that this competitive environment, offering this range of favorable options, persisted throughout 2024, even with the increased claim frequency and those concerns about how past losses are developing.
This brings us back to that absolutely crucial piece of the puzzle you mentioned, improved cyber preparedness by businesses.
Right, companies have been working on this.
They have. Organizations haven't just been sitting still. They've been investing time, money, and effort into strengthening their cybersecurity defenses. The source underscores that this investment in better controls is having a tangible impact, particularly on the severity of losses when an incident does occur.
They provide a really striking data point from Aon to illustrate this. In the U.S. alone in 2024, there was up to a 77% reduction in claim payments.
77%.
Let that sink in, 77%. While attacks might be occurring more often, when they happen, companies are seemingly getting much better at containing the damage, recovering systems, and minimizing the financial fallout that ultimately gets claimed under an insurance policy.
Which directly reduces the financial burden on the insurer. Because, while frequency matters, the cost of those claims, the severity, is the primary driver of an insurer's profitability and pricing.
Makes sense.
Precisely. That massive reduction in the cost per claim even with a higher number of incidents overall, is the fundamental reason why the global market has remained competitive. Insurers' balance sheets haven't been hit as hard by new claims as the frequency might suggest.
Okay.
And the source projects that 2025 is expected to mark the third consecutive year of these competitive market conditions.
So the good news for buyers is this window of opportunity remains open, at least through the first half of 2025.
Seems that way.
But, and again, it's a significant but, there are still underlying underwriting concerns for insurers that temper this optimism.
Yeah, this raises an important question about the future sustainability of these conditions. Brent Reith, quoted in the source as the head of cyber solutions in North America, points to factors like the more tense global geopolitical climate,
Always a factor.
the constant emergence of new attack methods and unprecedented technological advancements, singling out AI, which we'll definitely need to dig into.
Oh, absolutely.
He sees these as potential drivers that could lead to more complex and severe activity in the future.
That quote really highlights the forward-looking concern. It's not just about the current state, but the trajectory of threats, isn't it?
Exactly. And he adds another layer of complexity by noting the concern that claims from prior years are developing unfavorably.
Ah, that loss development issue again.
Right. This means that incidents that happened a year or two ago, think complex ransomware recovery costs, regulatory investigations dragging on, or lengthy privacy litigation, are potentially costing insurers more now than their initial estimates or reserves.
So the final bill isn't in yet for older stuff.
Exactly. The full financial picture of those past events is still unfolding, and it might be getting worse over time, potentially getting worse over the next few years, as he puts it. This introduces uncertainty for insurers, even as the cost of new claims is currently lower.
So it's this fascinating duality. The present market is driven by current, lower severity claims, thanks to better company defenses, while the future market outlook is shadowed by the potential for more severe, future attacks powered by new tech and global events, plus the lingering financial tail from older, less effectively managed incidents. It's a complex risk calculation for insurers.
It is indeed. And while we talk about a globally competitive market, the source also makes it clear that this picture has regional nuances.
Right, it's not the same everywhere.
The trends are global, but the specific market dynamics play out differently depending on where you are.
Let's start with EMEA, that's Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. The source indicates that evolving cyber risks in this region are actually driving increased demand for cyber and E&O insurance.
Interesting. So more companies there are seeking coverage.
Seems so. Businesses there are increasingly recognizing the need for protection against things like GDPR-related privacy risks, supply chain attacks impacting European businesses, and ransomware targeting critical infrastructure.
What's particularly interesting in the EMEA market, according to Soren Stryger, their chief cyber broking officer quoted in the source, is that a number of near-systemic global loss events in 2024 did not significantly impact loss ratios for insurers in that region.
So even big global incidents didn't rock the boat too much in EMEA financially.
Apparently not. Despite major cyber incidents making headlines globally, their financial impact on the actual claims paid out by insurers in EMEA wasn't severe enough to trigger a market correction or panic.
So even significant events didn't destabilize the market there, allowing rates to continue to decline in EMEA.
They did, and the source projects this competitive environment will continue into the first half of 2025, partly fueled by new insurance carriers entering the market and bringing additional capacity with them.
Ah, new players shaking things up.
Exactly. More insurers wanting to write business in the region inherently creates more competition and puts downward pressure on prices.
And Alexander Curtis, an executive director for cyber and E&O in EMEA, really reinforces the intensity of this competition. He describes the market as highly competitive, detailing the dynamic. Incumbent insurers are aggressively fighting to retain renewals. They don't want to lose their existing clients to newcomers.
Makes sense. They're protecting their turf.
They're doing this by expanding the capacity they're willing to offer and moving down towers.
Okay, let's pause on moving down towers because it's a key concept for larger insurance programs.
Right. Explain that.
Imagine a company's insurance program as layers of coverage, like floors in a tower. The ground floor or first layer covers the initial portion of a loss, the attachment point.
The deductible, essentially, or the first layer the insurer pays.
Sort of. Yeah, the point where insurance kicks in. Subsequent floors provide increasing amounts of coverage above that. Moving down towers means insurers who traditionally preferred to offer coverage only in the higher, less risky layers, the penthouse floors, where losses are less likely to reach, are now willing to offer coverage in the lower, more frequently triggered layers.
Ah, so they're taking on potentially more frequent, smaller claims to win business.
Exactly. It's a clear sign of intense competition and a willingness to take on more potential exposure to win business. And alongside this, you have non-incumbent carriers, new players, or those previously not active in certain layers competing for positions throughout that tower structure.
That paints a vivid picture of the competitive dynamics in EMEA. Now let's shift focus to North America, where the story is similar but with its own specific details.
In the United States, the source confirms that buyers' market conditions absolutely continued throughout 2024. This held true despite that acknowledged increase in claim frequency and the ongoing concerns about prior year loss development we discussed earlier.
The market remained well-capitalized and competitive. The specific Aon data point for the U.S. market is that average cyber premiums fell by 6.7% in 2024.
A nearly 7% average drop is significant for businesses buying coverage. A key driver here was the presence of abundant capacity in the market, which contributed to a favorable January 1st, 2025 reinsurance cycle.
Reassurance.
Yeah.
That's insurance for insurance companies, right?
You got it. Think of it that way. A favorable reinsurance market means insurers can transfer some of their risk to reinsurers more cheaply, which in turn allows them to be more aggressive and competitive on the primary insurance policies they sell to businesses. This cycle helped extend the buyer-friendly conditions into the first half of 2025.
That interconnectedness is important. A good reinsurance market ripples down to help the end buyer. The source also notes that insureds in the U.S. are increasingly using cyber modeling to inform their purchasing decisions.
Yes, companies are trying to get more sophisticated, using models to estimate their potential financial exposure from different cyber scenarios like ransomware or data breaches.
Trying to quantify the what-ifs.
Pretty much. This helps them determine the appropriate limit levels of insurance coverage they should buy to adequately protect themselves based on data rather than just guesswork or tradition.
That makes perfect sense, using data to decide how much protection you need. And interestingly, the data shows that while prices were generally falling, 21% of Aon's cyber insurance purchasers actually added limits to their program in 2024.
So taking advantage of the lower unit cost.
Exactly. Some companies were taking advantage of the lower per million dollar cost to increase their total coverage.
However, Matt Schimmel, Chief Broking Officer in North America, provides a key piece of nuance. While pricing did decrease throughout 2024, those decreases began to stabilize towards the end of the year.
Stabilize, okay. And what was the primary force driving those decreases and then their stabilization? He points specifically to the marketing of excess placements in the national account segment, where there's a lot of capacity and competition. Can you break down excess placements in national account segment again for us, specifically in the U.S. context?
Absolutely. The national account segment typically refers to the largest corporations, those with complex risk profiles and sophisticated insurance programs.
The big players.
Right, like the towers we discussed in EMEA, their insurance is often layered. Excess placements are those higher layers of coverage, sitting above the primary or lower layers where smaller, more frequent losses would be handled.
So the layers covering really big catastrophic losses.
Exactly. Because the probability of a loss reaching these very high excess layers is lower, and because insurers are eager to deploy large amounts of capital in this segment, there is intense competition among insurers to write this business. This competition in the upper layers for big companies creates significant downward pressure on pricing for those specific placements.
Okay.
And that competitive pressure can also influence pricing trends even in the lower layers or for slightly smaller accounts.
So it's the big companies with deep pockets and complex needs who saw some of the most aggressive pricing competition.
Yeah.
And that started to level off as the year closed. Now let's look at Canada.
The source indicates that the Canadian market experienced an even more significant rate deterioration, meaning steeper price decreases, than the U.S. market did in 2024.
Steeper than 6.7%.
Much steeper. Average premiums fell by a notable 13.5% across Aon's portfolio there.
Wow. A 13.5% drop is substantial, almost double the rate decrease in the U.S. And Katie Andrucho, the cyber broking practice leader in Canada, quoted in the source, states that they are still experiencing an extremely soft rate environment well into 2025.
Extremely soft. That's strong language.
It is.
She attributes this primarily to the continued presence of new entrants aggressively pressurizing the marketplace. Similar to EMEA, new insurers are seeing opportunity in Canada and are competing hard for market share, pushing rates down significantly.
So maybe they see Canada as less crowded than the U.S. market.
It suggests the Canadian market might be perceived by these new players as less saturated or potentially offering different opportunities compared to the more established U.S. market.
Yeah. So synthesizing this regional data, we see a clear global trend of declining rates and competitive conditions in 2024 extending into H1 2025.
Definitely.
But the degree of that competitiveness and the specific drivers vary. Canada saw the steepest declines driven by new entrants. EMEA also saw declines in new capacity, while the U.S. saw stabilization later in the year, influenced by competition for large accounts and a favorable reinsurance cycle.
It really underscores that cyber insurance isn't a single global market. It's a collection of regional markets influenced by both global and local factors.
It's a crucial point. Understanding these regional nuances is key for anyone operating internationally or even comparing market conditions. However, as we touched on at the very beginning, this discussion of a favorable insurance market exists squarely alongside a landscape of constantly evolving and, frankly, increasingly sophisticated threats.
Right. These are the risks that are driving the need for this insurance in the first place and are very much keeping insurers and probably many business leaders listening up at night.
Absolutely. While companies are getting better at managing the impact of incidents, the attackers are relentless and innovative. This section of the source dives into the current and emerging cyber and E&O risks that are top concerns. Let's start with perhaps the most talked about tech of the moment, artificial intelligence.
AI, yeah. It's fundamentally changing capabilities, and unfortunately that applies to malicious actors as well. The source highlights how AI significantly helps cybercriminals automate and scale their attacks.
Automate and scale.
Yeah.
What does that mean in practice?
It means they can scan for vulnerabilities faster, develop malicious code more quickly, and identify potential targets with greater efficiency. Basically, doing more bad stuff faster.
And they call out a specific, particularly worrying example. Social engineering. AI can make these attacks incredibly sophisticated.
Oh, absolutely. Social engineering relies on manipulating people. Traditionally, this involved crafting plausible-sounding emails or making convincing phone calls.
The classic phishing email.
Right. With AI, the sophistication skyrockets. Think about those phishing emails. AI can generate highly personalized content tailored to your industry, role, or even past communications, making them far harder to spot as fake.
No more obvious typos or weird grammar.
Exactly. They can be grammatically perfect and use realistic language. We're also seeing the potential for deepfakes, AI-generated audio or video to power phishing, voice phishing, or business email compromise, BEC attack.
Where they pretend to be the boss.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Where a criminal could potentially impersonate a CEO's voice asking for an urgent money transfer. The expected use of AI among threat actors is predicted to increase significantly in 2025, meaning this threat vector is only going to become more prevalent and harder to defend against.
That's a chilling prospect. And the source notes that insurers are keenly interested in how organizations are using AI not just for business, but specifically to strengthen their cybersecurity defenses.
It's a double-edged sword, right? They want to see you using AI defensively, but they also need to understand the risks if you deploy AI insecurely.
Right. Moving on, another major concern listed is global IT and supplier outages. The source states that 2024 saw several potentially catastrophic cyber events tied to reliance on third-party providers.
Yeah, the whole supply chain dependency issue.
And a key point for insurers is that the full financial impact of some of those major 2024 events remains unknown as of April 2025. That uncertainty is a significant factor in underwriting systemic risk.
It is. When the total cost of a major event isn't clear months later, it makes it hard to price risk accurately. In response, insurers are expected to intensify their scrutiny regarding the use of supply chain vendors and cybersecurity platforms in 2025.
So expect more questions about your vendors.
Definitely. They'll be asking tougher questions about your third-party risk management practices. The source uses the CrowdStrike outage in 2024 as a prime example of a significant, albeit non-malicious event with widespread impact.
That incident, caused by a software update issue, wasn't an attack on CrowdStrike, but its impact on businesses relying on that endpoint security software was massive.
Huge.
The source calls it a non-malicious but significant wake-up call. It highlighted just how vulnerable businesses are to issues affecting their critical third-party providers, especially in the security stack itself. It prompted businesses of all sizes to review and bolster their cyber risk programs.
And this ties directly into the concern about dependent business interruption from ransomware, which is also highlighted.
Ah, okay, connect those dots.
If a major software provider or cloud service is hit by ransomware, or even just experiences a significant non-malicious outage like CrowdStrike, it can cause widespread business interruption for many companies that rely on them.
One failure affects thousands.
Exactly. This leads to aggregation issues for insurers, a single event triggering claims under hundreds or thousands of different policies simultaneously. Underwriting these interconnected systemic risks where one incident can have a cascading effect across their entire portfolio of insureds is one of the biggest challenges the cyber insurance market faces.
It's the nightmare scenario. One point of failure causing widespread disruption and massive potential payouts across their books. Speaking of potential payouts, privacy litigation is another area of rapidly growing exposure.
Yeah, this is a big one. This stems from claims related to the alleged wrongful or unlawful collection, use, or sharing of personal data. The exposure is constantly evolving because new privacy laws are being enacted globally, nationally, and even at the state level.
It's a patchwork quilt of regulations.
It really is. And these laws are quickly being leveraged in both regulatory enforcement actions and significant civil litigation. Companies are finding themselves navigating a minefield of complex, overlapping, and sometimes contradictory data privacy requirements.
And the source gives specific examples of the types of claims being observed. Website tracking and pixel tracking using hidden code to collect information about user behavior online are major areas of focus.
Right, the tech used for advertising and analytics is under the microscope.
And they specifically call out litigation related to legislation like the Illinois Biometric Information Privacy Act, BIPA.
BPA is a particularly impactful example in the U.S. It governs the collection and use of biometric data like fingerprints, facial scans, and voice prints.
Stuff like employee time clocks using fingerprints.
Exactly. Unlike many privacy laws, BPA includes a private right of action, meaning individuals can sue companies directly for violations, often leading to significant class action lawsuits. This has resulted in major settlements.
So big money involved.
Potentially, yes. The mention of BPA signals the heightened focus on these very specific and potentially very costly privacy exposures tied to evolving legal frameworks. Insurers are actively reviewing policy language and coverage to ensure their policies clearly define what is and isn't covered in this rapidly changing privacy legal landscape.
Moving to a risk that feels like an old foe, but is still incredibly prevalent: ransomware.
Still here, still bad. The source confirms that ransomware incident frequency remains stubbornly high. Despite all the improvements in security, threat actors are still finding ways to execute successful ransomware attacks.
And a recurring target.
A particularly concerning recurring target is the software supply chain, where compromising a widely used software provider can give attackers a pathway into many customer environments.
Which circles back to the supplier outage risk we just discussed. And as you highlighted, the significant concern for insurers with ransomware, especially when targeting supply chains or widely used platforms, is dependent business interruption.
Exactly. It's not just about one company getting encrypted anymore. It's about one incident potentially shutting down or severely impacting the operations of dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of companies downstream.
The aggregation risk again.
And that brings us back to the challenge of underwriting systemic events that could lead to massive aggregation issues. Insurers are grappling with how to accurately price and manage the risk of an event that could trigger claims across a significant portion of their insured portfolio simultaneously. It's hard to model the interconnectedness of the modern digital ecosystem.
It's a complex risk equation. Another area of significant concern is cloud security breaches.
Cloud services are, as the source correctly states, integral to modern business operations. Very few businesses today don't rely heavily on providers like AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud.
They're essential infrastructure now.
They are. But while essential, they present significant cyber risks. These aren't risks inherent in the cloud platform itself, usually, but often stem from misconfigurations, poor access management, or vulnerabilities in services running within the cloud environment.
So user error, basically, or insecure setup.
Often, yes. The potential consequences of a breach are severe. Data loss, significant financial loss, including response costs, legal fees, and business interruption, and potentially devastating reputational harm.
And the source provides a specific worrying statistic here: a 26% increase in the number of new and unattributed cloud intrusions in 2024 compared to 2023.
That increase is stark, yeah. But the unattributed part stands out. Why might so many cloud intrusions be unattributed?
Good question. What does that mean?
Well, that raises a fundamental question about visibility and attacker sophistication in cloud environments. It could mean threat actors are becoming more adept at masking their presence or origin within cloud infrastructure.
Getting better at hiding their tracks.
Or it could point to challenges organizations face in effectively monitoring and conducting forensics in complex cloud setups. Either way, nearly half of all cloud intrusions being of unknown origin or attacker is a red flag, suggesting defenders may not have a full picture of the threats they face in the cloud.
Absolutely. If you don't know who or what is causing the breach, it's much harder to defend against future attacks. Finally, they mention IoT device vulnerabilities.
Ah, the Internet of Things. The widespread adoption of IoT devices, everything from building management systems and security cameras to manufacturing sensors and smart medical equipment, has vastly expanded the attack surface beyond traditional IT assets like servers and laptops.
So many more connected things.
Right. Attackers are increasingly looking to exploit vulnerabilities in these devices as an initial point of entry. A poorly secured smart device connected to the corporate network can serve as a backdoor,
An easy way in.
allowing attackers to gain unauthorized access to internal networks and systems, potentially bypassing more robust perimeter defenses. It highlights the need for comprehensive asset management and security beyond traditional computing devices.
So that's the threat landscape. AI amplifying attacks, supply chain dependencies creating systemic risk, privacy laws fueling litigation, ransomware remaining prevalent, cloud environments being targeted with increasing sophistication, and IoT devices opening new doorways for attackers. It's a complex, constantly moving target.
It is, and this brings us back to the other side of the paradox.
Wow.
The fact that, despite these threats, the market is favorable. The source transitions by acknowledging the progress made, stating, as controls improve, businesses must remain vigilant.
Right. It's a recognition that businesses have invested, and this has positively impacted the market.
The source confirms that organizations have indeed made improvements in their core cybersecurity measures and controls. These are the controls that underwriters assess when determining risk.
And these improvements have led to tangible benefits for businesses. Reduced retention.
Meaning the company pays less out of pocket first.
Right. Better pricing on their policies, and enhanced terms, more favorable coverage conditions.
And they quantify some of these improvements using Aon PsyQ red flags data. This data assesses the strength of critical security controls within organizations. U.S. renewal clients, on average, achieved a 9% year-over-year improvement in critical security controls in 2024.
9% improvement. That's measurable progress.
It is. The source notes that demonstrating strength in these areas may impact insurability, essentially. Better security makes you a more attractive, less risky client for insurers.
They even break down some of the sectors showing the most significant progress year over year. A 15% improvement in financial institutions, 14% in healthcare providers and services, and 12% in industrials and manufacturing. These are industries that often face significant regulatory requirements or hold sensitive data, so seeing notable progress there is encouraging.
That's absolutely the good news. Many companies are making real strides in bolstering their defenses. However,
Here comes the but.
always a but. The source immediately follows this by emphasizing the crucial point that continual vigilance is essential in an ever-evolving cyber landscape. You can't just improve once and consider the job done because the threats, as we just detailed, are not static.
They list some foundational components of a robust cyber posture that remain critical. Regular vulnerability scans, practicing response through tabletop exercises, and implementing multi-factor authentication.
Basic blocking and tackling, really.
Pretty much, but essential hygiene.
And this is where the data from the source becomes incredibly insightful, revealing persistent and frankly surprising gaps in these fundamental areas, despite the overall trend of improvement.
Okay, let's look at those gaps, because they are key takeaways for any business. For global and enterprise U.S. clients, the largest, presumably most sophisticated companies, the data shows that 57% reported that their vulnerability scans covered less than 100% of the enterprise.
57%, less than full scanning.
Yeah. Think about the implication of that. Over half of large U.S. enterprises have blind spots where they aren't regularly checking for known weaknesses.
An attacker only needs one unpatched server, one misconfigured device, and an unmonitored segment of the network to gain access and potentially compromise the entire environment. Leaving significant parts of your network unscanned is a critical hygiene failure.
It really is. And for these larger clients, nearly 30% indicated that their backups are not stored in a secondary data center.
Oof. That statistic is particularly concerning in the context of ransomware and catastrophic outages.
Right. If your primary data center is unavailable due to a fire, flood, or a ransomware attack that encrypts your live systems and your local
You
backups,
need that offsite copy.
you are reliant on a geographically separate backup to recover. If that secondary location is missing, your ability to recover quickly or at all is severely compromised. It's a single point of failure for disaster recovery.
It absolutely is. And the picture is even more challenging when you look at the data for middle market U.S. clients.
Okay, what about them?
The data shows that nearly 60% of them had no tabletop exercise in 2024.
60% did no practice drills.
None reported. And almost half failed to store their backups in a secondary data center location.
Wow. No tabletop exercise for nearly 60% of middle market companies. That's a massive gap in preparedness. A tabletop exercise isn't just checking a box, it's a crucial rehearsal.
It really is. It simulates a cyber crisis, a ransomware attack, a data breach, a supply chain outage, and involves the key stakeholders from IT, legal, communications, leadership, etc., walking through the incident response plan step by step.
Like a fire drill for cyber.
Exactly. Practicing the plan under simulated pressure helps identify flaws in the plan itself, clarifies roles and responsibilities, who calls whom, who makes what decision, reveals communication bottlenecks, and builds the muscle memory needed for effective action during a real chaotic event.
So skipping this step means you're trying to figure it out during the actual emergency.
Which is the worst time. The data also shows the backup issue is even more prevalent in the middle market than for larger companies.
So while there's an overall narrative of improvement in security controls, these data points highlight fundamental hygiene gaps that persist for a significant portion of companies, particularly in the middle market.
It creates an interesting tension when we revisit Pablo Constenla's quote from the source. He states, clients are generally better prepared to handle incidents now than they were 5 years ago.
Okay, so he sees improvement in readiness overall.
And he uses the CrowdStrike example again, saying the world responded very well to CrowdStrike because clients were ready to address it. This anecdotal evidence suggesting readiness based on how companies navigated a specific non-malicious outage seems positive.
Yeah, many companies did manage to recover or work around the CrowdStrike issue.
But does that anecdotal readiness for a specific type of event truly reflect the overall picture when hard data shows that nearly 60% of middle market firms aren't even practicing any incident response scenario through a tabletop and half lack secondary backups?
Right. Is the CrowdStrike experience representative of overall resilience, or was it a unique situation they happened to be equipped to handle? The data on the persistent hygiene gaps suggests there might be a disconnect between perceived readiness and fundamental capabilities.
Seems like it. There's still significant foundational work that needs to be done across many organizations.
And this tension, a favorable insurance market and perceived readiness on one hand, but persistent fundamental security gaps and evolving severe threats on the other, leads directly into the strategies presented in the source. Given this dynamic, what can companies actually do?
Yeah, what's the actionable advice here? The source emphasizes that businesses need actionable insights and solutions to enhance their cyber risk strategies.
This is where we translate the market dynamics and threat landscape into practical steps for you, the listener. The source presents the current favorable market as an opportunity, quoting Pablo Constella again. Exposures will change constantly. It is crucial to reinvest a portion of the premium savings to build a sustainable, long-term cyber risk program.
That quote captures a core takeaway. The current competitive insurance market, potentially offering lower premiums or better terms, shouldn't just be seen as cost savings to boost the bottom line.
They'll just pocket the difference.
Right. It's a strategic opportunity to take those savings and reinvest them directly into strengthening your actual cybersecurity posture and resilience. The source says this is an opportunity to plan ahead, to build a program that will serve you well, not just today, but as threats continue to evolve.
And the CrowdStrike outage, even though non-malicious, is cited once more as something that prompted businesses of all sizes to review and bolster their cyber risk programs. It was a real-world event that spurred action, reinforcing the need for proactive review.
And that need for review, combined with the identified risks and the revealed hygiene gaps, points towards specific strategic actions. The source lists 5 strategies as key ways to significantly improve a company's cyber risk management program.
Okay, let's detail these actionable strategies. The first one is test your incident response plan.
This is directly addressing the gap we saw in the data, particularly for the middle market. It's not enough to simply have a plan documented somewhere. You need to practice it.
Do the drills.
Exactly. This means conducting tabletop exercises, simulations, or walkthroughs. Why is testing so crucial? It helps identify weaknesses in the plan before a real incident occurs. Maybe a key contact number is outdated, or the decision-making authority isn't clear, or different teams have conflicting understandings of their roles.
Find the problems before the crisis hits.
Precisely. Testing improves coordination under pressure, builds confidence, and ultimately leads to a faster, more effective response when a real crisis hits, which directly reduces the potential impact and cost.
The second strategy is consider legal implications and consequences.
This involves proactive legal planning. Before an incident happens, you need to understand the relevant legal landscape. What data privacy laws apply to your business based on where you operate or who your customers are? Think GDPR, CCPA, BIPA.
The whole alphabet soup.
Yeah. What are your mandatory breach notification requirements? What is the potential for regulatory fines or civil lawsuits if a breach occurs?
Knowing the potential fallout.
Right. Having legal counsel involved early in your planning helps ensure your incident response actions comply with the law and don't inadvertently create additional legal exposure or compromise your position in future litigation. Knowing the potential legal fallout guides your response strategy.
That makes perfect sense. Legal concerns are a massive part of post-incident costs and headaches. The third strategy is understand your cyber coverage and claims.
This is fundamental. Don't just assume your policy covers everything you think it does. Read it.
Actually read the policy. Novel idea.
Yeah. Understand exactly what types of incidents are covered. Ransomware, data breach, business interruption, privacy litigation, what's excluded, what your deductible or self-insured retention is, and most importantly, what your notification requirements are.
How fast do you need to tell the insurer?
Crucial question. How quickly do you have to notify your insurer after you discover an incident? What information do they need? Knowing your policy inside and out beforehand is vital. It ensures you trigger your coverage correctly and promptly during a crisis, allowing you to access the often critical resources the insurer provides, like specialized legal counsel, forensic investigators, and PR crisis firms.
Trying to decipher complex insurance jargon during a cyber attack sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
The fourth strategy, define your claims and gather evidence.
This is the operational aspect of the claims process during an incident. Once an incident occurs, you need to be prepared to quickly define the scope of what happened, the systems affected, the data potentially compromised, and the business impact.
Document everything.
And know what to document. You also need to know how to gather and preserve the necessary evidence that your insurer will require to process your claim. This includes technical logs, forensic reports detailing the attack vector and timeline, records of your response actions, and documentation of the financial costs incurred, forensics, legal, notification, recovery, business interruption.
All the bills.
Right. Having a process defined for this ensures crucial evidence isn't lost in the confusion of an incident, which can delay or jeopardize your claim.
So understanding what evidence is needed is key to getting reimbursed for eligible costs. And finally, the fifth strategy. Strengthen your response to incidents.
This is the overarching goal that the other strategies contribute to. A stronger response means improving the speed and effectiveness of your actions when an incident occurs.
Faster, better, stronger response.
Pretty much. This involves faster detection of malicious activity, more effective containment to limit the spread and damage, quicker recovery of systems and data to minimize business interruption, and clear, timely, and appropriate communication with affected parties, regulators, and the public. It's about building a resilient operational capability to withstand and recover from a cyber event as efficiently as possible.
So these 5 strategies, proactively testing plans, understanding legal exposure, mastering your insurance policy, preparing for evidence collection, and generally enhancing response capabilities, all feed into building a more robust cyber resilience program. And as we saw earlier, demonstrating stronger controls and better readiness can lead to better terms in the insurance market, but more importantly, it makes you a harder target and reduces the actual impact if you are targeted.
Exactly. They are concrete steps that bridge the gap between simply having a policy and being truly prepared to manage cyber risk in today's environment. They turn the favorable market conditions into a catalyst for genuine security improvement.
Okay, we've covered a significant amount of ground here. We started by highlighting the paradox. A favorable, competitive cyber insurance market coexisting with rising claims frequency and evolving severe threats.
That core tension.
We explored why the market is favorable, largely thanks to a significant reduction in the cost of claims due to businesses improving their defenses and abundant capacity.
That 77% drop was key.
We looked at how this plays out differently across regions, from steeper rate declines in Canada, driven by new entrants, to stabilization in the U.S., influenced by large account competition.
The regional nuances, yeah.
We then delved into the constantly changing threat landscape. AI amplifying attacks, supply chain dependencies creating systemic risk, the growing headache of privacy litigation, persistent ransomware, sophisticated cloud breaches, and vulnerable IoT devices.
A daunting list, really.
It is. And we contrasted the narrative of overall improvement in security controls with the crucial data showing persistent fundamental gaps in areas like comprehensive vulnerability scanning, adequate backup strategies, and the lack of testing incident response plans, especially in the middle market.
The hygiene gaps are still there.
And finally, we laid out 5 actionable strategies identified in the source that companies can implement right now: testing your plans, understanding legal, knowing your coverage, preparing for claims and evidence, and strengthening your overall response, framing the current favorable insurance market as an opportunity to invest strategically in these areas.
So, zooming out, what does all of this mean for you? Whether you're a CEO thinking about risk tolerance and investment, a CISO leading the security team, a risk manager navigating insurance renewals, or simply someone who needs to understand the digital risks facing modern businesses, these dynamics are directly relevant.
If you're involved in purchasing or managing cyber insurance, the current market conditions absolutely offer opportunities to optimize your coverage and cost. But this deep dive underscores that you can't stop there. You need to use the insights on the specific evolving threats and the common control gaps to have informed conversations with your security teams and your brokers to ensure you're getting coverage that aligns with your actual, current, and future exposures, not just the cheapest option available.
It's about the right coverage, not just cheap coverage. And if you're on the IT or security side, your work directly impacts not only the company's risk, but also its insurability and the potential financial outcome of an incident. Remember that 77% reduction in claim payments.
Your work matters to the bottom line.
Absolutely. The data identifying key gaps in areas like scanning, backups, and exercises provides a concrete roadmap for where investment and focus are critically needed within many organizations, potentially including your own. Addressing these fundamental hygiene issues is non-negotiable.
And for anyone, the discussion of emerging risks like AI and the complexities of supply chain risk highlight that staying informed about the threat landscape isn't just for specialists, it's essential for navigating the modern business environment.
The favorable market is a temporary condition, a moment to capitalize on. The risk is permanent and evolving.
Well said.
Ultimately, the source material presents a clear message. The competitive insurance market is a positive development driven in part by past improvements, but it doesn't mean the cyber risk problem is solved.
Not by a long shot.
It highlights a critical window to make strategic investments in closing known security gaps, testing your readiness, and building a truly sustainable, long-term cyber resilience program. Don't just view premium savings as found money, see it as capital to reinvest wisely in fortifying your defenses.
Prioritizing those investments based on the insights about which threats are emerging and which foundational controls are still missing in so many organizations is key to making a real impact.
So, to bring it all together, the analysis as of April 2025 reveals a cyber insurance market that is currently competitive and favorable for buyers, influenced heavily by a significant reduction in the financial severity of claims, even as the frequency of incidents rises.
But this exists against a backdrop of serious, evolving, and interconnected threats, from AI amplifying social engineering to systemic risks introduced by supply chain dependencies and the ongoing challenge of ransomware and cloud security.
And crucially, the source data also reveals persistent fundamental security hygiene gaps within many companies, particularly regarding comprehensive vulnerability management, secure off-site backups, and the essential practice of testing incident response plans.
Which leaves us with a thought-provoking question to consider, doesn't it? Given that the source highlights both the market's current optimism and these undeniable, persistent gaps in fundamental security hygiene, does the market's favorable state truly and fully reflect the underlying systemic cyber risk?
Or is it maybe a bit too optimistic?
Or is there a potential for a rapid shift in market conditions if
Mm.
just one of those near-systemic events we talked about were to have a wider or more severe financial impact than those seen in 2024?
How fragile is this favorable market, really?
How much reliance should companies realistically place on insurance as a safety net versus making the necessary, consistent investment directly in closing these known fundamental security gaps? What balance makes the most strategic sense for you and your organization in tackling the ongoing, ever-changing challenge of cyber risk in the years ahead?
Something to really mull over as you look at both your security budget and your insurance renewal.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the state of the cyber and E&O insurance market. We hope this helps you navigate the current landscape and make more informed decisions about your own cyber resilience journey.